Okay, this is the PowerPoint slides for Chapter 1, the real Chapter 1. Not the one we had last week, but the Introduction to Access. I'm going to go through the slides fairly quickly, and I'll be making another video to do some demonstrations in Access where we'll learn more about these. So if I go through them quickly, that's by design. I just want to point out the highlights here of these slides. This first chapter, the main thing we're going to learn when we get into Access, I'll show you the parts of the screen and how to navigate amongst the different objects. Okay, we'll talk about all of these different objectives through the slide set. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. Why do we have a lot of database courses in your programming curriculum? Well, as you probably know, databases are, like it says here, everywhere. Pretty much every business, small, large, uses a database to store their data. Data is very valuable to a company. And most of these databases are relational databases. Objects. When we get into Access, you're going to see, and we're going to use these throughout this semester, these are the 4 most common types of objects inside of an Access database, and actually any database for that matter. But tables, queries, forms, and reports. And in particular, this course focuses on tables and queries mostly. Tables are where the data is actually stored, so we'll really be looking at tables closely. And then queries is basically a question that you have of that data once it is stored. How are you going to get that data out in a useful format? So we're going to talk about queries quite a bit. And then forms and reports, I'll also show you those. There's a chapter actually coming up on forms and reports. In a few weeks, you'll get more on those. A database then, like we said, talks about or consists of mainly tables. These tables are what store the data, and in a database you'll see anywhere from 1 to hundreds of tables in a database. The ones we'll be using mostly have 3 to 7 different tables in to keep it simple, but here's just a little graphical depiction of what a table might look like. A table is made up of fields and records. Fields are columns, and then the records are the actual data that get put into the table. So we'll be using these terms all the time. Another term for fields is columns. Another term for records is rows. Keep moving here. The navigation pane, I'll show you that in Access. These are just different parts of Access. It'll be better for me to demonstrate that than to just talk about them here on the slides. When we're looking at tables in Access, and of course, again, I keep saying this, but the table is where the data is. There's 2 main views of a table. We'll look at it in data sheet view, where we'll just see rows and columns of data. And then design view of a table is actually how you construct the table. You determine which fields are in this table and what type of data can be stored in those fields. So we'll look at both of these also. There's just a screen. Again, I'll show you when I get into Access in the other video. This is design view and data sheet view. I'll explain those more. Tables have what's called a primary key, and that is one of the fields or one of the columns in the table. It has a unique value that will identify a particular row or record in the table. A form is really just more of a data entry or a way to view the table's data. Query, again, like I said, that's a question, how to get the data out in a usable format. For example, you might have a customer table with all your customers' data in there, but at a certain point you might only want to look at customers who have outstanding orders, or only customers that are in a certain zip code or whatever. Those questions are considered criteria. There's a way to create queries in Access, and all all relational database systems would have queries or something similar to it. A report is a little fancier way to output data. Its main intent is to be printed, so that's why it's got the name report. When you name your database, of course, you want to name something meaningful. You do that with almost anything you create on a computer. Any file you create, no matter what it's for, you want to give it a meaningful name so that you can look at the name and kind of know what it is. And of course, store them in meaningful folders and subfolder names too. So if you were storing a database file for this class, you might call your folder Intro to Database. That's all they're talking about here. And backup is important. I did say that data is very valuable to a company. Most companies couldn't exist without their data, or they'd have a hard time functioning. So they will spend a lot of money and go through a lot of effort to make sure that it's backed up, just in case of some kind of catastrophe where they would lose their computer system or their data, lose it any manner of ways. But they want to make sure that they can recover from that. So backing up the database files is important. As a company uses its database over time, of course, it gets fragmented and whatnot. So there is a way to compact and repair the database to make it run more efficiently. Access has this. I'll show you that when I get into the demo part. These are just the steps in backing it up. I'll go through that. And they are critical. Companies will do a lot of things to make sure that they're backed up. And it's not so critical in class here to back up our database because we're not running a business. We're just in class, and we usually have a backup of our files that we can start over and stuff like that. If you're looking at database files on your computer and you see an extension .accdb, that's the extension for an Access database file. Filters, you can read through that in the text. Not super important, but you should read through them, and then in the hands-on exercises in the textbook, which you should do, you'll get some practice setting up filters. It's just a way to, like it says here, only look at data that you really want to look at. There's different types of filters that you'll be doing in those hands-on exercises. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. One of these last slides here talks about whether to store your data in Access or Excel. Well, some companies, when they first start out, maybe the person who is supposed to save the data would use Excel, and that would work for certain instances. A lot of times they do that because Excel is easier to understand and use. It's just usually a single worksheet that people can type data into. But it really gets, once you get lots of data, Excel becomes cumbersome. There's not a lot of good ways to get the data out of there and relate it to other pieces of data. So there's a lot of deficiencies that Excel would have once the company gets larger. So here, it's better to use Access once you're going to have multiple tables. You have a large amount of data. Maybe you need to connect to or retrieve from external databases. Grouping, sorting, these are all things that relational databases would do much better than Excel. Multiple users. Here's an acronym, DBMS, stands for Database Management System. Of course, this one says RDBMS, Relational Database Management System. Most databases are relational, so a lot of times you'll see this acronym without the R in it. But a database management system in general is a way to store your data in this relational format. Store your data in sets of tables that are related to one another, and you will be able to access that data then very efficiently. Throughout the course, we're going to start out by using other databases that other people have created. And eventually we're going to get into how to design the tables ourselves. That'll be a little bit later in the course. That whole process is called normalization, on the best way to store data. You know, how many tables you're going to have, which fields should be in which tables, and how they're related. That whole process is called normalization, which we'll get to, you know, after the first half of the semester. I said that a database has multiple tables, usually with data in it. The key to a relational database is these tables are then related somewhat. This is mainly so that you don't have duplicate data. Duplicate data is one of the worst things that you can have in a database, because if you think about it, do you want to store your customer's information in 3 or 4 different places, or just one? That's the whole idea behind a relational database, is to store the information once, then relate data together to each other that would make sense of the data without storing it multiple times. Enforcing referential integrity, we'll talk about more of this in Chapter 2. That's a very key concept, but we'll get to that in Chapter 2. All these relationships in Access are set up in what's called the relationship window. We'll look at that. Here's referential integrity, which we're going to get into a lot deeper next week, but make sure you read about it, whatever's in there in Chapter 1, referential integrity. And then once you have your database created, a lot of times you'll put in sample data just to make sure that it really works. The databases and those student data files that we have, those are just, those aren't really real data, but it simulates real business data. This is just a look at the relationship window and Access. Like I said, I'll get into that more in the demonstration. All right, so that's it. That's the highlights of this first chapter.